To this story now, many people would not want to be the Finance Minister, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, right now. He faces a tough balancing act, helping ailing state-owned enterprises survive and trying to stimulate the economy while keeping spending under control. Godongwana will deliver the mid-term budget tomorrow. Joining us now to unpack what we can expect is the Institute of Race Relations Head of Campaigns, Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Many would say that the mini-budget, as it's termed, is said to be the most important because it somewhat sets the tone for the fiscal framework for the next year's budget and also gives us a sense of the spending priorities or how Treasury perceives the economic situation now. What do you expect the Treasury to prioritise?
Thank you. It's hard to say how much control exactly Treasury has. Of course, Minister Godongwana is one member of Cabinet, one member of the African National Congress, and I think around the world, particularly in the UK, we've recently seen how leaders and their finance ministers can get along or not get along. But in terms of what he'll prioritize, I suppose the competing interests for the windfall revenues or the surplus revenues that are coming the fiscus's way are bailing out state-owned enterprises, which could mean direct bailouts for Transnet, Sanral, could mean debt restructuring for Eskom, basically taking 200 billion rands worth of their equities and turning it into debt. Or it could be the public service wage sector bill, so lots of strikes, lots of wage negotiations, and maybe the extra money will just go to above inflation or at least above negotiated wage increases. There's social grants. South Africa has a very important system of social grants. The Institute of Race Relations thinks it's hugely important that social grants are paid on a needs basis in order to keep children from starving, in order to keep pensioners able to survive. I mean, it's a bare minimum, but those grants are ramping up, and there's negotiations and discussions about taking that further. And finally, there's the question of debt. South Africa is already very heavily indebted in terms of the public purse. If you look at our debt servicing costs, it's between 20 cents and 25 cents out of every rand are already going back to basically paying back interest on the money that we owe. That's because we've got junk status. We're not a very trustworthy lender. And so when people lend us money, they expect very high interest rates in return. And as a result, there's a huge drain on every other priority as long as we keep that debt level so high. So those are the competing interests. And Godongwana is going to have to send some signals about which way, what's going to win and what's going to lose.
But then if we look at these competing priorities, what would you say if they are to continue with the tone of fiscal consolidation, if they are to continue with that narrative? What would be the right approach? What should be central now? Because there's also the debate of social spending versus spending that will stimulate growth.
Yeah, I think that Treasury and the Reserve Bank have been very clear that government spending as a proportion of GDP and government inefficiency has taken us to the point where when the government spends an extra rand, it's not having a positive multiplier effect in the economy. It's having a less than 1 rand benefit to the rest of the economy. And so the real question is, are you spending your money on value-add projects? I think that it's very important for the public wage negotiations that if people want to raise, they should be able to show that they're adding more value than they were adding before. That's certainly how wage negotiations work in the private sector. If the business is doing worse, if it's making less stuff, then the workers can't go and ask for more money. But in government, even though less goods and services are really being delivered, workers tend to think that they can ask for more on the basis that they deserve it because this is really a social project. And I think that has proved to be unsustainable. South Africans, generally speaking, are very frustrated with the levels of service delivery. And I think that if there's any place that Godongwana can signal a sense of toughness and a sense of really a progressive sense that we have to go forward together on a value-add basis, it's going to be by signaling that wages are not going to be the benefit of surplus revenues, where those sectors haven't shown increased satisfaction of the customer or the citizen or the resident of South Africa.
So what of the argument by socialists that would say that if perhaps you're spending more on this aspect, the social spending, that here you're going to see a lot of money circulating, which increases demand, and then we see more production, because that has always been the argument, particularly when they talk about the basic income grant?
Yes. Look, I'm a radical centrist, so I kind of am amused by people on the left wing and people on the right wing. On the right wing, you've always had arguments to say, if you just cut taxes on the rich, then it's going to pay for itself because they'll spend more money and that'll make the economy more better, and then you'll get more revenues. And that's been tried and it's never really worked out that way. And there's people on the left who say, just give more money to the poor and that'll create more consumer demand, aggregate consumer demand, and that's going to grow the economy, and that will in turn pay back the debt that you had to take in order to pay for those increased grants. That's also never really worked. I think the common sense approach is to say where there's real need, where people are desperately on the edge, you have to address that need. You cannot, the UN estimates that 3.5 million children are going to be suffering from malnutrition under the age of 5 by 2025. That is unacceptable. We as South Africans can't abide by that. We need to be making sure that there are social grants for those in need. But in terms of trying to use social grants as a way to stimulate economic growth, that's unsustainable. That's value grab. That's redistribution. That's a zero-sum game where you're cutting a pizza 16 ways instead of 8 ways in order to make the pizza bigger. No. If you want to grow the economy, if you want to address South Africa's number one social problem, which is unemployment, you need to make it easier for people to invest here. I think that one of the concerns that we certainly would like to bring to bear on the policy discussion is that the ANC, by its own reckoning, has said that gross fixed capital formation has to get to 30% of GDP. That means the rate at which we're investing in factories, in real hardcore stuff that grows jobs. That has to be almost 3 times more than what it is today in order to address unemployment, in order to get the revenues going that we need to meet those social needs. So the policy question Godongwana has to answer is what laws have to change, what policies, what regulations have to change in order for us to get there. And our answer is quite simple. He needs to cut the red tape. He can't do that all himself. But Minister Godongwana has the power, for example, to grant exemptions to Eskom and every other business in the country, every other state-owned enterprise, to say, you guys don't have to deal with BEE regulations and procurement, for example. And we've shown that the Zondo report draws attention to that fact, draws attention to the fact that it's in the national interest to say whether it's foreigners or locals, whatever color, it doesn't matter. South Africa needs value for money at the moment because we're too poor to go for anything else. That's in, as Zondo said, the national interest, to prioritize that over racial concerns. And Minister Godongwana did that kind of thing with Eskom and Transnet briefly earlier in the year. He could signal that he's ready to do that again for any state-owned enterprise that wants to just go for a penny-pinching value for money approach, that he will grant them the exemptions. He will cut the red tape for them to do that. I think that that would send a very strong signal, and it's one of many options.